Hey everyone, this is Dr. Catherine Kennedy, founder and executive director of Wellness for Educators. We are so excited to serve as the sister podcast of Coffee with a Little Bit of Cream. We're grateful for the opportunity to cross-post and amplify Shamari Jones and Paul Sutton and their mission as they examine issues that impact education and the education system, and ways that issues of race, power, and privilege impact students, educators, schools, districts, and the larger educational system. Here's the next episode for your listening pleasure.
Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of Coffee with a Little Bit of Cream. I'm Paul Sutton, and along with Shamari Jones, we're excited to share with you a conversation we had with Dr. Andrea Kane, the former superintendent of Queen Anne's County Public Schools, about her experience leading for change as a first Black female superintendent in a culturally white school district. Like so many others, we first read about Dr. Kane's story when she was featured in an article in the New York Times in October. We felt like her story was representative of what so many other educational leaders of color have experienced and continue to experience as they try and do right by the students who continue to feel invisible, ignored, and harmed by the system. Our conversation explores many topics, not the least of which is how educators and educational leaders of color best serve the needs of students on the margins amidst a national reckoning with issues of race, power, and privilege that has seeped into the public discourse about schools and the purposes they do and should serve. When we sat down with Dr. Kane, we wanted to know more about her story and also wanted to know what it's like for educational leaders of color, in particular those who identify as Black or Latinx, as they work to support students who have historically been oppressed by the system. We wanted to know the extent to which they feel empowered or constrained by the current discourse around critical race theory, institutional racism, and racial equity in schools and districts, and the extent to which the demands of school and district leadership ask them to absorb harm not experienced by white leaders. We also wanted to know ways white parents and community members could support educational leaders of color as they work to make schools and districts more just spaces for all of our students. Lastly, we wanted to know how her experience in Queen Anne's County Schools informs how she prepares future school district leaders in her new role at the University of Pennsylvania. We thank you for joining us for this conversation and hope you enjoy it as much as we enjoyed having it.
Okay, so today we're going to have a conversation with Dr. Andrea Kane from Queen Anne's County School District out of Maryland. She's going to engage in us around some wonderful dialogue and some great discourse around matters of social and racial experiences that she has had in her role of superintendent. Maybe a little bit of information of what it means to trickle through an organization to make it to the head of that organization, and what change can be and how it could feel as a person of color and seeking to be the implementer of those changes. And we'll get a little bit down into what are the issues and the barriers for success in some of our systems as we seek to transform these systems in service of those who historically have not had access, historically have not had their own sense of power to make those changes. And so I'm really excited to get into this dialogue today. I'll let Paul say a few words, and then we'll ask for Dr. Kane to introduce herself really quickly.
Sure. Thank you, Shamari. Super excited to be speaking with you today, Dr. Kane. I know Shamari and I have been looking forward to this for weeks. We were really inspired by your story, or the feature in the New York Times about your story. And as soon as we read it, we wanted to reach out and see if you would come talk to us. And we're very grateful you said yes. I am a white male assistant professor of education at Pacific Lutheran University in the Pacific Northwest. And over the past 2 or 3 years, I've been lucky enough to work on issues of equity and racial equity with Shamari. And our friendship kind of came about from there. I was a high school English public school teacher for like 8 to 9 years before I went back and got a doctorate in education from the University of Washington. But so Dr. Kane, if you could just kind of describe your personal background, where you consider home, and maybe some of your earliest educational experiences and how they kind of drew you into education to be an educator.
Awesome. Great. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. It is really my pleasure. I'm honored to have been invited. So, a little bit about me. I am 30 years in public education. This would have been the 30th year. I am a mom. I have two sons. One is 31 and one is 28. So they're adults now and doing well. And I'm so grateful for that. I am a stone cold Ravens fan, being from the Baltimore area. I grew up in Baltimore City. So, that's a big part of who I am. I have been in public education for quite a long time. I started out in banking. I majored in economics, actually, in undergrad. And I started out in banking. But, the longer I did it, I was a bank manager. And I thought, you know what, you really have to do what you want to do in life if you're going to spend this much time doing it. So I quit my job as a bank manager and I went back to school. I had no education courses. I went back to school and I got certified in elementary education. And I loved it, honestly. I loved it. So I continued my education and went back and got a master's degree in curriculum and instruction. And then my licensure, my certification for administration and supervision. And then much later, in my career, I earned my PhD in education leadership. But I started out as a substitute teacher. So after I quit the bank, I started out as a substitute teacher. And I've held a lot of different positions in, the school district, from substitute to teacher assistant. I worked in a computer lab. I was an elementary teacher. I worked in the Title I office to support Title I schools. I worked as the school improvement specialist for about 77 elementary schools at that time in Anne Arundel County in Maryland. Annapolis is right there. I, went back and I became the assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction in Anne Arundel County. I spent 22 years in Anne Arundel County schools and holding a lot of different positions from substitute to associate superintendent over 125 schools. So it was a great learning experience for me, great role models. And we did a lot of work. That's where my passion for equity work started. And we did a lot of work around eliminating achievement gaps as a district-wide effort. It was all encompassing and it was good. We did research to find out what the best strategies would be. All of our schools and administrators were involved. So it was quite a time. And at that same time is when Common Core standards first came out. So I was assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction at that time. We had a change in leadership. And at that time, I thought, well, this is an opportunity for me to look at what I also wanted to do, which is to support an urban school district. So I was able to work for Richmond Public Schools, and I did get quite the urban experience. It was very hard work academically, but we did it. We made a lot of improvements. We put together an academic improvement plan, made a lot of improvements to student performance and the building capacity for the educators in that district. And I was there for 3 years. When the position became available for a superintendent in Queen Anne's County. And at that time, I was in Virginia. My oldest son was there. He had graduated from Hampton, so we were there together. And he was moving away to Seattle. So I thought, well, there's no point in staying in Virginia by myself. I might as well go back home to Maryland. And I was appointed to the superintendent position in Queen Anne's County. And that was in 2017. I was there for 4 years. And, that's how I sort of got started, and that's how I came through. I always really wanted to be an educator. I wanted to be a high school English teacher. And, I ended up in elementary school, but I wanted to do that. I was a Sunday school assistant, and that had an impact on me since I was 14 years old. So education has been there for me as a passion. While I don't have teachers in my immediate family, educators in my immediate family, it was just something that I really, really wanted to do. And I was able to do it from a lot of different perspectives, with a suburban population, an urban population, and Queen Anne's County is a rural population. So I've had quite a number of experiences that have really served me well.
So what was that like? I work in a non-urban, very suburban city, but Seattle right down the street we claim Seattle to be fairly urban, even though this is the Pacific Northwest and there really is no urban. And when I think of urban, I think of a vast, vast diversity of individuals from a multitude of backgrounds, which we do have. However, Seattle is a city that is riddled with wealth, and the wealth is substantial in comparison to that of those who are experiencing poverty or experiencing homelessness, what have you. But I get a tiny, tiny bit of this urban experience. When you go from something that feels suburban and urban to something rural, what was your expectation? And B, like, what did you receive based on that expectation?
Well, I had a bit of insight because, one, I'm from Maryland, and Queen Anne's County really is right next door to Anne Arundel County, albeit the Chesapeake Bay is in between. So you'd have to cross a bridge to get there. I had some understanding of what was happening in Queen Anne's County. I knew that the Eastern Shore in general was a place with a history of racism. And I also had a colleague who I worked with for quite a while, almost 10 years in Anne Arundel County, who was at that point serving as the interim superintendent in Queen Anne's County. So I knew that there had been racial incidents there. Queen Anne's County is a wealthier county. There are 24 school districts in the state of Maryland. Queen Anne's County ranks about 7 or 8 in terms of wealth. So I knew that there would be challenges. I knew that there would be challenges with racism. And knowing that, I still felt that I had something to offer Queen Anne's County in terms of, yes, even though they were a high performing district, to continue that high performance and really to begin to shine a light on the students that fell in the gap, the students in the margins, because I had some experience doing that and had experienced success doing that, had experienced success, elevating student performance in some very challenging, districts. So I was able to do that. I felt like that was going to be something that I could do, definitely with support, making sure that I had a strong leadership team, of course, the support of the school board, because my thinking was if they hired me and they understood what I was about, because you certainly share what you're about during the interview process, that you would have the support of the school board. Queen Anne's County is a 5-member school board. When I was hired, there was 1 African-American school board member and 4 white school board members. I knew that I did not have a unanimous vote when I came there, but obviously I thought that I would have, pretty significant support, which turned out not to be true. But my expectation was that I would. And my expectation was that I would come into a district that, yes, had experienced some issues with race, but I would be able to move the needle in that district. So that was a major factor in why I went there.
That makes me think about when I first took this job 8 years ago. I came out of nonprofit. So none of my background prior to working in this school district comes from being in a school system. I didn't teach in the classroom space. I parachuted right on into the district office in an administrative role as a director. And when I came from nonprofit to public sector, boy, did my chest was puffy, man. I walked in with swag, like I'm about to turn this mother out. Like, look, y'all, you don't know who you hired. Like, I am a gangster, all the things that I'm getting ready to do. And it didn't take very, very long before I realized that the normal ways that I experienced success in former jobs, I was a chief operating officer at the Urban League. I ran the YMCA Black Achievers for many years and did some work at the UW for a little while. But in all of those experiences, I was given the latitude to be able to actually incite this change based on what I felt was the appropriate thing to do. But I did not find that to be similar in my experience in working in a school district. And so my question for you is, when you first accepted this role, knowing Maryland very well, having a connection to the interim superintendent, seeing experiences of racism probably pop off in years prior to you being there, how puffy was your chest when you walked in? Like, I'm going to do this thing, and I may experience some stuff, but it's not going to be stuff that really allows for me or causes me internalized damage.
My chest was not puffy at all. I knew that I was walking into a very, very challenging position. And so I really slow walked it, right? It was a very intentional, slow walk because I didn't want to upset the apple cart right off the bat. So it was very, very intentional for me. Right before the year before I got there, there was an incident with a little Hispanic girl at one of the elementary schools, and some other students, some white students, had basically attacked this child. I mean, racist slurs and throwing stuff at her. I mean, it was not good. And so the interim at the time, he pulled a group of people together that were instrumental in the work of equity and pulling communities together to begin, to do some work. So there had been a pretty visual incident in the community. So, and that was recent. So, and think about it. Queen Anne's County, I said, was a high performing district. It is a high performing district. In my view, what I knew about Queen Anne's County in terms of academics, they didn't need a major overhaul. There was some things that needed to be done so that we could pull in students from the margin, but I didn't think I was going to experience a lot of pushback to do that. I thought that my pushback would be from, community members who were not accustomed to hearing the word equity or equitable practices, that kind of thing. So it was an intentional slow walk. I didn't go in puffed up. In fact, a lot of the times before I met with a group, I would say, I did not come here to turn this district upside down. I was the first African-American superintendent there. So people were watching me. They were waiting to see what was going to happen. And for 3 years, we did do, like I said, a slow walk. I introduced equity. I introduced the reason why we did equity. We first started with a process for analyzing data so that we could see the full picture of the district. We used a process called Data-Wise Improvement Process. It's out of Harvard, very well known, evidence-based. It really focuses on where we need to build capacity for educators so that we could find those problems of practice and then change what we did with educators so that we could address learner-centered problems. So this is very academic, very evidence-based. And when we did that, we could see where these huge gaps in performance were. We could see gaps in performance across every single data point in terms of academics in Queen Anne's County, and they were large gaps from African Americans versus the white students or students in special education services. And so we had a mountain of data, and we were able to say, yeah, this absolutely is a reason why we need to embark on something different, because what we are doing is not working for every student. And so that's when we started to have conversations about equity. And so every month when I met with district leaders at school-based leaders and central office-based leaders, we talked about equity. I brought in contractors to help build our capacity. I brought in a group called the Cambio Group, and they trained us, engaged us in professional learning on implicit bias, cultural proficiency, culturally responsive teaching. We used a variety of different tools so that we can ensure that what was happening in the classroom was addressing the needs of all of our students, and particularly the students, like I mentioned, in the margin, and then gave an opportunity to really engage with teachers to get the work done so that we could address their mindset. We could address what biases they might have in a way that was not confrontational, but really engaging them in the work. So, there were a number of things that we were able to do for 3 solid years. We even, I had one initiative with equal opportunity schools where we looked at the students who were enrolled in the advanced placement courses. And you can imagine, we only had 2 high schools, and I go from one high school to the other high school. And it was very rare that I saw a black or brown face in those classrooms. And so we embarked on that initiative to increase the students who are not traditionally enrolled in advanced placement classes in those courses. And that was another, thing. We took an entire year to really understand the reasons why students were not enrolled in those classes, the mindsets of the educators, including the administrators in those high schools, those who were teaching advanced placement classes and those who were not, how we would support students, how we would pair up students with an adult who really cared about them and was going to commit to supporting them through this process of engaging in, advanced placement classes. So we did a lot of work for 3 solid years before, the big blow up in the 4th year. And we were experiencing success.
Mm-hmm. So Dr. Kane, as a superintendent, how much pushback were you getting from just, maybe folks within the district, or I guess, parents who were sending their children, to district schools, when you were having those conversations about equity and raising issues of racial disparities and advanced coursework and stuff like that? How much pushback were you getting from the community and from educators within the system?
I would say it was pretty moderate. It wasn't overwhelming, not at all in the beginning. I can tell you that there was someone who contacted a county commissioner and a delegate, for the district, and said, she's spending tax dollars teaching racist information and dividing the community and, those kinds of things. How does she get to do that? And I would explain, what we actually were doing. And quite frankly, one of the times it had been planned before I even arrived in the district. So I wasn't the one who planned it. The interim superintendent planned it, but he knew that it was necessary, and he worked with the State Department to deliver it. So, it was not something that was a novel thing. It wasn't new. It was just that some people didn't like it. And when we looked at equal opportunity schools, absolutely, there were teachers who didn't want to do it. There were teachers who had been accustomed to teaching only the children who had some of the highest GPAs, obviously, in the school. And that was absolutely an artificial barrier to other children engaging in those classrooms. They made it up. You don't have to have a 3.7 GPA to be in an advanced placement class. That's absolutely ridiculous. So we had to get rid of those kinds of artificial barriers. And part of the year-long process of getting ready for the work was looking at those kinds of things, and thinking about how we feel about which students should and should not be in advanced placement courses. So we took the time to really look at ourselves as a district and what we were doing for children. Like I said, some people didn't like it, but that was no reason to stop the work, because the work was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. So the pushback came from externally as well as internally, if you talk about in terms of employees in the district versus non-employees in the district. I'll add that I am aware that not only were there, teachers that were not big fans of the work, there were some administrators in the district that were not big fans of the work. But, it was something that was important. It was something that we kept on our agendas every single month. And we were in schools, all the time and working with leadership teams and equity teams that we formed to build capacity so that they could understand why we were doing the work. And, when you really think about it, why would you deny a child an opportunity? Why deny? And so we had to come to that place, and it wasn't unanimous, not by a long shot, but it was what it was. And I also know that I had some board members who were not fans of the work and who openly in a public meeting said, when we were doing some budget work, they thought, well, let's cut the work that we're doing with those kinds of programs so that we can save money. But that saving money was so unimportant at that point versus the outcome or the purpose for the reason that we were spending those dollars. And it was not astronomical, believe me.
Is my mic back on? Okay. I don't know what happened. It just disappeared. I was asking a bit about this fourth year that you've alluded to a couple of times. And things were, you stated, intentionally paced to walk into a circumstance as opposed to run, with an absolute transformation state on your mind. But something happened in this fourth year where you somewhat hit a roadblock or a barrier to being able to continue the work in the way that you want to continue the work, in the way that maybe even this data states is important for you to do the work. What went down there, and what was your response to that?
So it was June of the end of my third year, and June 2020. And I wrote a letter, as I always did, to the community, and said, what we were working on, things that it was the end of the year. So these were some of the accomplishments. These are some of the things that we continue to do. And in addition to that, I felt the need to address what was happening across the country. That was when George Floyd had been killed, Breonna Taylor. I mean, it was just Ahmaud Arbery. It was so much going on in the world. I implored parents to think about how we are going to talk to our children, the children, about the images that they're seeing on TV. When you see a Black man murdered, let's call it what it is, for 8.5 minutes, our children saw it. Our children needed an opportunity to react to that. We as adults needed to help the children make some sense out of what they were seeing, on TV, what they were hearing on the news. And indeed, they were hearing it and they were seeing it. And when I did, and I gave some pretty practical strategies in that same communication to the public. And, from Tyrone Howard, he had just recently written an article, and he listed a couple of bullet points for how we might address that. And so I shared that with the public. And, initially I got a lot of responses back, particularly from teachers, saying, oh, thank you, Dr. Kane, because, and in that same letter, let me add that I also said there's racism in Queen Anne's County, and there's racism in Queen Anne's County public schools, as well as a variety of other places, I said, but that set wrong with some people. But we did. I had teachers say to me, thank you for addressing that, because I have things happen in my classroom and I don't know how to respond to it. So I just don't. But now I know that I should, and it's okay to do that. And I would be supported. And absolutely, you would be supported, because guess what? The children tell me that things happen in your classrooms. And they also tell me that nobody's doing anything and that nobody's listening to them. So it was that kind of thing. But, long story short, a particular member of the community was particularly incensed because that particular member of the community felt like I was indoctrinating children because I had given them an opportunity to have a conversation about race. One of the local management boards in a neighboring county had sponsored this talk that, for middle and high school students in multiple districts. And I, like some other districts, shared that information with students and parents in the middle and high schools. And they felt like I was indoctrinating, or this particular parent felt like I was indoctrinating the students by allowing this conversation. They said that there was no racism in Queen Anne's County, no racism in Queen Anne's County public schools, basically until I got there. And some said, well, how do you say there's racism when we hired you, the first Black superintendent? How can you say that? Others would come to board meetings and they would say things like, I want to know what teacher is allowing this to happen. I want to know the names of the students, which students are saying that things happen to them, as if I'm going to put students on blast, basically. I would never do that to an adult. I would never do that to a child. I am the superintendent, so put it on me. I'm telling you that I've had these conversations, but I'm not going to share names. It was quite the event. But, that's when things started going south, is the end of the third year, when I wrote to the community to say what was happening. I also asked the community to, take this time to extend grace to one another. I mean, it was COVID. It was a lot of social justice issues going on. There was visual, overt racism, as well as covert racism. And I said that I had experienced those things in Queen Anne's County. And so let's extend grace to one another. Let's take time to listen to one another. Still some people took offense to that. And I later learned that it was a platform for this particular person, to really build a political career. But that's when things went south.
This is happening across the country. In our neighborhood and neighborhoods all around. Right now, I believe it's really being masked as CRT and folks in their absolute overt challenge with the idea of critical race theory, when I believe so many people don't even know what any of the tenets of critical race theory are. But they've grown this opinion, this very deep opinion, that whatever it is destroying our children. And it sounds a little bit like the experiences that you had, thinking about this as it's a movement. I mean, there's nothing else. Absolutely. There's no other word I could use to describe this. Like, somehow like this telephone connection line has reached from New York to Los Angeles and every city along the way. And folks are calling one another saying, yo, let's posse up, and head up these movements in our local school districts to combat what could be progression towards our next generation being more enlightened, enlightened enough for them to be able to eradicate over time some of these barriers that we experience and our current students are experiencing. Do you have advisement as you think about this movement and how much of a swell it has accessed or obtained over the course of just about a year's worth of time? Any advisement for those of us who work in school systems or other superintendents, in particular those of color, who stand on this platform of justice and really want to institute some sort of change?
I absolutely do, because that's exactly what happened to me. It's definitely a movement. It is about one or a small group of people really mobilizing to create something out of nothing. So critical race theory, this person in the community who started all of this, and I can move on actually from saying this person and say the name, because the name has been printed in the newspaper. And this person goes on, speaking tours across a lot of different areas to disparage me publicly. So, but I would never do that to that person. But this Schiffinelli, she is by trade an attorney. Her husband by trade is an attorney. And what she first did was rally people by this, fear mongering is what I believe it really was, to say that something was happening to white children in schools that wasn't happening, and brought critical race theory in, and even said to parents, check your children's book bags because they're teaching critical race theory. Well, that clearly is evidence that Schiffinelli did not know what critical race theory was, but sort of jumped on the bandwagon, because clearly we do not teach theory to 6-year-olds. We don't teach critical race theory in schools, period. That is that's a university college level theory. So it is not happening in elementary schools. So parents didn't need to check book bags. So that was what was going on there. And it grew to a group of about over 2,000 people. And they put out this petition to have me fired because I'm the Black Lives Matter superintendent and, teaching critical race theory, and they needed to get me fired, and it grew to about 2,000. And then another group in the community got wind of it and supported me and put out a petition of their own. It was the Sunday Supper Club. And we had about 7,000 people who signed that petition to say, let children talk about race in schools. Why wouldn't we allow? Because guess what? They're talking about it anyway. Mm-hmm. So why not create a safe space for them to talk about it that's moderated by adults who have experience having these conversations, and allow it that way? But what I would say to, other educators, other leaders who are experiencing this, and they are experiencing it across this country. Number one, know your allies. You really capitalize on that social and professional and cultural capital that you have as a leader, whether you're a school leader or a district leader or an educator of any type. If you're experiencing anything like what I experienced, you got to know who your allies are, and you got to know who you can call on, who you can trust to support you in this. Because when it becomes public, somebody has to come to your aid to support you, because you get it from every single angle. And that turns either the school upside down or the district upside down. And there are things that have to continue, even though you're fighting this huge battle that has to do with race. And 9 times out of 10, misinformation. Just because somebody is either angry or somebody is fearful, and they've mobilized a group of people to sort of come down on the leaders. And, we see it in the news. New York Times did, a series on what's happening with school boards and parents. And it is a lot of hype around political issues that do not have a place in public schools. But the large percentage, I would say, of it is about fear and misinformation. There are certain phrases, right? Certain terms that are used that really, really spark conversation or divisiveness. Indoctrination is one word that they use. Critical race theory is another word that they use. And then they say things like, they shouldn't have to send their white children to school to be ashamed of things that they didn't have any control over, i.e. our history, slavery, for one, the mistreatment of Black people from slavery to today, why there's a need for Black Lives Matter, all of those kinds of things. So, there are certain key words that trigger, this really hateful and sometimes violent response to what people believe is happening to their children. So you got to know who your allies are and capitalize on that, because they can support you publicly in ways that you may not be able to do yourself. In my case, part of my issue was my board did not support me. In fact, my board went before the county commissioners to really absolve themselves from anything that I was doing. They wanted the public to know that they would be speaking to me about what I did. In other words, they would be dealing with me because they believe also that what I did was wrong. It wasn't wrong. So I didn't have my board support, but I had others in the community. There was a rally for me. Hundreds of people showed up, but still there was this vile that happened and continued to happen to me throughout the rest of my time in Queen Anne's County. So I would say, know your allies. Think about whether or not this is something that is for you to talk about and to advocate, because if it's not in your soul, it's in my soul. I will die on this sword to talk about it, to advocate for it, to speak up for children, because sometimes children can't speak up for themselves and sometimes their parents won't speak up for them either. So know your heart, know if this is work that you want to engage in, and then if it is, do it and stick to it. Do what's right for children. If you're an educator, you have a responsibility to do what's right for children. And if we have groups of children who are marginalized, who are not being heard, whose voices are not being heard, and who are suffering, who are not given the same opportunities to excel and do well in school like other students, then that's our job as educators, as adults. We have to rectify that.
Can I just add that we have an opening at the Bellevue School right now? If you need me to slide you the application, I got you.
What I would say is somebody with a voice needs to be involved in the interviewing and at least the listening groups that tend to happen when superintendents are being interviewed. And the questions should be raised. What do you do for children who sit in the margins? What are your feelings about equity and equitable practices in the classroom? What do you believe about children who are not performing and what should be done for them? So the questions need to be asked.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Listening to you talk about that experience, Dr. Kane, I can't help but wonder, and I don't know if you feel comfortable speaking about this at all, but it must have taken a tremendous toll on you personally. And I'm struck by how, as a Black superintendent, you probably had some inkling that this was probably going to happen at some point, right? There was going to be some issue that you were advocating for, given the district you were in, that there was going to be a significant amount of backlash. And so I wonder, you know, you in the letter you sent to the public after the George Floyd murder, it sounds like you said absolutely all the right things. And it sounds like a ton of other letters that were sent out by other superintendents across the country. So how do you make sense of just the tremendous backlash you received, the impact it had on you? Like, how do you make sense of like the fact that you were doing everything that your gut was telling you that you were supposed to be doing, and yet it still came your way? The backlash still came, right? The rancor still came your way. How did you make sense of that?
So just like I said before, I knew that there were issues of racism, right, in Queen Anne's County well before I got there. There are publications that, and one of them I think is referenced in the New York Times article that address, you know, how to deal with the racism in Queen Anne's County and the fact that it is there. So I knew that there was, you know, a racism issue in Queen Anne's County. But like I mentioned, I really felt like I had something to offer. And I believe that I knew some strategies that have worked for children who are in the margins in other districts, and that they would work in Queen Anne's County. So I knew that there were issues, but I wanted to go there anyway. And once I got there and I experienced the backlash that I did, I thought that was so uncalled for. I thought it was off the charts. I thought, here's a superintendent who's going to be truthful with you, who has had 3 previous years of excellent performance and has great accomplishments. We had our first Maryland Blue Ribbon School in 20 years. We had the first Blue Ribbon School ever in Queen Anne's County. We started the first African American history course, because no, there was not an African American history course when I arrived there in 2017. That was ridiculous to me. I'd never heard such a thing. We had our first we piloted our first K-12 fully virtual school before COVID. So we recognized the importance of giving families choices if their choice was to have their child do instruction online, fully online. Had that happen. Of course, I'm the first African-American superintendent. We were only the 2nd district in the state of Maryland to have 100% of our schools certified green schools. So environmental literacy was big. We had a lot of firsts and a lot of great performance. Number 1 graduation rate the entire time that I was there. So there were lots of things to be proud of and lots of work being accomplished that was absolutely undeniable. So for me to meet with the backlash that I met with after that 3rd year, I was taken aback. But more so, I was taken aback because my board would not support me. I thought that if we could address these members of the community that believed what they believed erroneously, that we could pull together as a district, as a community, to do what was right for children. But that did not happen because board members obviously believed in the same way that the Schiffinellis believed, or they were afraid or something, but they did not support Andrea Kane. So I was taken aback by the level of backlash. I'm talking threats. I'm talking nonstop being beaten up in the public, and my board, who hired me, not there to support me. I was not understanding that, not in the least. And what they really did was go out to try to save face for themselves rather than speak up for what was right for children. I wasn't prepared for that. So, and it took quite a toll on me, I have to say. I could not make sense of it, and it took a toll on me. I ended up being out from work from mid-October to mid-December. And that is an important message, though, for leaders who are in this work, is take care of yourself. Wellness is not, and self-care is not just a phrase. It is something that has to happen, because when you are being beaten up in the public every single day by people who know you and people who don't know you, that takes a toll. And we have to protect our mental health. We have to protect our physical health. I was out on sick leave and my board members were still sending me emails with lists of 24 things to do. And I'm not supposed to be working. And I would say to them, how do you expect for me to do these things when I'm out? Right. So it was just bullying and disrespect and discrimination and racism on every single level. So, we have to protect our minds, right? We have to protect our mind and we have to protect our body. And that is important for leaders who are going through this to realize. I had to learn it the hard way. But once I did what I needed to do for myself and I went back to work in December, oh yeah, now you got to strengthen Andrea Kane and I'm ready for the fight. So it doesn't matter. They would have done better if they had figured out a way to do what they were conspiring with one of my members of my leadership team to do, which was buy me out and get rid of me because they didn't want to deal with me. They would have done better doing that than allowing me to come back, because then, and I told them and a board member, now I am empowered and I'm going to do what I need to do for children regardless, because now I'm ready for the fight. I got my mental piece together. I got my body together. I'm ready for the fight. And that is exactly what happened. And it was a fight until the end. One common misperception is that people think that I stepped down. I didn't step down. I certainly didn't get fired. My contract was up. I was not at all interested in renewing the contract, and the board was not at all interested in offering me another contract. So it was just sort of a natural departure, but it shouldn't have ended the way that it did end.
So Paul and I have, we've been discussing this idea for a little over a year now. I certainly want to write a publication about it. I'm going to lay it out a little bit and see how you respond to it. Ideally, I want to interview leaders such as yourself, leaders who've been given opportunities to oversee large bodies of things of work, who have this moniker of being in charge. And I want to talk a bit about and ask questions to these leaders around, on your journey to getting to this leadership role, were there things that you feel as though you had to let go of, natural pieces of your own self? And I think about the checkpoints where I'm going to get to this principalship. Okay, cool. I'm solid. I can have a foundation of like doing what I want to do. Okay, now I want to get to this district office thing. Okay, I've arrived. I've done what I had to do to get here. And now I want to be this super. So along the way in this journey, there are certainly checkpoints. We're definitely in a white-dominated culture where there's a lot of white normative rules and behavior expectations to occur on that journey in order for you to be greenlit to have that access to that particular job. And I say access very intentionally. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, now that you've arrived at this journey, did this position, and looking back, now fully looking back because you're no longer in it, did this position cause or create for you an experience of departing in any way from who you were? If so, was that a regret? If so, were you able to get that back during the time you're in these roles, or after, when you left this role and vacated to the next thing? What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, yeah, I absolutely, as an African-American person in a white-dominated field, but not just African-American and white, let's put gender in it, because that sort of complicates things as well. So I am a woman, an African-American woman in a white male-dominated sort of environment, right? And so, yeah, you mentioned several of them. So, there are steps to this, right? So first you become, an administrator, and the levels of administration sort of, increase over a period of a time. So, yeah, but what I had to give up basically didn't happen so vividly until I got to Queen Anne's County. I knew Queen Anne's County wasn't ready for full-on girl from Baltimore City, right? They were not ready for that. And I didn't bring them that, because there are other facets to me. It's not just the girl from Baltimore City. I'm a professional in my own right. I'm a professional with successes in my own right. And so that should be valued. But as a Black woman in a lot of environments, including some environments in Queen Anne's County, that just complicates the issue. That's not, and the fact, and it's a fact, that I had to probably take probably out of it. I worked harder and probably longer than a lot of white males that are in this same space, right, to get to where I was. Factual, right? Look at the numbers of women, the numbers of African-American women, the numbers of African-American women in predominantly white districts, conservative white districts. Minuscule, right? So did I have to give up something? Absolutely. I had to give up something. But what I was not going to give up was my passion for doing what was right for children. That is just who I am, just like being Black is who I am. I'm not going to, sort of make that dull in any way, shape, or form, because that's just what needs to be done. And I strongly believe that. So my approach definitely had to be changed. I had just left Richmond City Public Schools, where probably 80% of the staff there is African American, right? And almost all of the students live in poverty, almost. Right. And so the approach that we were able to take there was different from the approach that I took in Queen Anne's County. Richmond loved my Baltimore City, right? Mm-hmm. Queen Anne's County, they wanted to know why Queen Anne's County had to give money to the state that might have to go to Baltimore City, right? So, and that is literal. That is actually something that a commissioner would say to me. Why do we have to contribute to Baltimore City? Because we have funds and they have needs. We're part of a system, a state system. But, so it was that kind of thing. And yes, I did. I had to give up some of myself in order to not scare people, in order to not have people not think that I didn't know what I was doing, despite all the accomplishments that I had before I got there and since I had been there. So as I look back, I do think about, how I had to sort of make myself fit in so that I wouldn't scare people and have people thinking lots of things that were not true about me and about my work. So that's something that, I did have to grapple with. The blessing in that is, in part, my experience in Queen Anne's County landed me at Penn. Mm-hmm. And I have full autonomy to talk about race and encouragement to talk about race, to talk about equitable practices, to talk about what worked and what didn't work in all of my experiences, whether it was Anne Arundel, Queen Anne's, or Richmond. And I have a group in my executive level classes. That's a group of sitting leaders. They are thirsty for a forum to talk about what is happening in their districts right now. Some of them are in situations like I was in. And you mentioned a little bit earlier that this is happening across the country. It's happening to Black superintendent after Black superintendent, Hispanic superintendent, woman, female superintendent. This is, yes, a movement that's happening across the country. And we've got to be diligent about understanding what's happening, because we've got legislation, equity gag order legislation that is happening right under our noses that says you can't talk about racism, you can't talk about sexism, gender issues, LGBTQ. You can't. They're taking rights away from educators to talk to children about what's really happening in the world, as if that's going to stop it from happening in the world. And that is something that, leaders have got to be cognizant about. And I'm constantly talking about it so that they can understand the importance. In a minute, we're going to have legislators telling us that we can't teach children that slavery happened. It happened. We're not going to it's not going to, go away. It happened. And we have to think about and help children to critically think about the reasons it happened, the impact of it happening, so that we don't have anything like that continue to happen. But what's happening right now is starting to look like it, right? I think back and I think about how slaves weren't allowed to learn how to read, because then they'd be thinking and they'd be considering how they could get themselves out of the situation that they were in. And by legislators saying that children cannot talk, educators can't talk to children about so many different things, that's saying they don't want children to think. And school is about teaching children to think independently, think critically about things, not just being spoon-fed. And legislators essentially are taking away opportunities for children to be taught and to think critically about some pretty major issues in American history that will impact how we interact with each other in the future. So that is something that as educators, we have got to be on our game about that and talk about mobilizing. That's where we ought to be mobilizing, because this legislation is happening, and in some cases without much of a blink.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Dr. Kane, this makes me wonder, when you're teaching your current students at UPenn and what it seems to have become a different educational landscape than we had maybe 3 to 5 years ago, how do you teach your students who are, say, in the executive program, how to deal with this? Like, how do you, in what ways does your experience that you had as a superintendent and in the educational system draw forward into how you teach and how you prepare these folks to go to take up leadership positions out in the educational world?
Well, number one, having the conversation. So the fact that we can talk in a space where they're safe to say what's happening, why they think it's happening is number one. That is so beneficial. So that collegiality is so critical when you are under fire, right? Because there are others who are experiencing the same thing that you're experiencing or something similar. And when we put our heads together, we can really start to brainstorm some solutions that will work, because there's not a single answer. There's not a single solution to everybody's issue, because while they may have some common threads, some of the dynamics may be different. Maybe somebody has the support of their board. Maybe somebody doesn't have the support of their board. Maybe in general, they have the support of the community, or they have the support of educators who are implementing the changes. It just depends on what the situation may be. So we talk about it. I talk about what happened to me. I really ask for some critical perspective, because I'm open to, if people think that they're leaders, if they think that there may have been something different that I could have done, if there was a different perspective, if there was another way to handle it. That's how we resolve issues. Have the conversation, talk about it, look at it from multiple perspectives. And then we talk through the implications. So we talk through what it is, we talk through the implications, and how that's going to ultimately impact children, our students, right? So let me give you for example. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about gentrification. And, we've talked about racial justice in schools, social justice in schools. But this one particular week, we were talking about gentrification. And, I encouraged students to think about it from both perspectives. And I'm not saying that this is universal. I'm saying this particular case, I wanted them to think about it from the perspective of the family where the child is going to have to move, which is probably a Black, brown, or poor child that's going to have to move to another school. And think about it from the perspective of a family whose child is going to move into a gentrified school, and why that would make sense for that particular family. And that provoked a lot of conversation. So we can say gentrification is bad for Black, brown, and poor kids. But can we look at it and say, well, how about the families who are bringing their children into gentrified schools think they're doing the best for their children as well, right? Mm-hmm. So look at it from every perspective, right? And try to understand the dynamics, the factors that are causing this thing to happen. And then we can, sort of come to some kind of conclusions about things. So as I present in my classrooms ideas that are pretty challenging like that, I look at it from the perspective of what are the facts, what's really happening here, and what are the implications of decisions that leaders, may be making, and who benefits and who doesn't benefit. Let's have the conversation, so we can see it from multiple perspectives. Might not change what happens, but having the conversation is what opens up, the opportunity for ideas.
I'm thinking about your now fairly entrenched history and being an educator. in varying schools, different counties, different states. What's something you regret or that you're remiss about in your experience as an educator?
Something that I regret is not kicking and screaming and fighting about it earlier, right? Because it should have, I don't think it should have received the vitriol that it received, but perhaps if we had started earlier on some of the serious things, by the time we got to this time of, social reckoning in June of 2020, maybe we would have been a bit more ready for it. And maybe a member of the community would not have gotten the chance to mobilize people in the way that she did. So maybe if we had have been out there being very public about some of the things that we were doing and the changes that were happening with students, maybe we wouldn't have ended it the way that we ended it. So that's my regret. Speaking louder sooner. Not that we would change, because we certainly wouldn't change. But I think being louder about it sooner, I don't know, maybe people would have been more ready.
Dr. Kane, Shamari and I live in a district that is in some ways similar, I think, to Queen Anne County schools, and in some ways it's different. And as a white man, who does some volunteer work with the district, I'm always kind of thinking about what the role is of white people to support causes of equity and racial equity in their local school districts. And I could imagine different white parents listening to this podcast just wondering, what could I have done? Or if that happens in my district, what can I do? And I'm wondering, do you have any advice for maybe those white folks who are in these school districts who are like-minded or feel passionately about issues of race and racial equity and equity in general? What advice would you give them for ways they could be constructively supporting the work of those who are doing the work?
That is such a great question. And in fact, on Monday, some colleagues and I are going to do a talk at Penn. And in fact, at Penn, we have a variety of groups that work on different things centered on race, racism, social justice, and all of those kinds of things. And I belong to a group that out of many groups that's called the Black Affinity Group. There's also a White Affinity Group. I'll be working with the White Affinity Group on Monday around exactly this. And some of the things that we'll be sharing is pertinent because the holidays are approaching, and sometimes you end up in spaces with family members and friends that don't think like you think. You might think that it's okay to support issues around race, and your family might think, no, that's the wrong thing that you're doing. So we wanted to share some ideas about how to have the conversations. And part of it, first thing first, is don't avoid the conversation. Engage in the conversation. Listen, whether people agree with you or not. Listen to what people are saying so that you have some understanding of their perspective, be it right or wrong in your mind. Listen carefully, and then, find ways in the conversation that you can pose a question even. What if, or are we afraid of something? And, those kinds of things, because I think that a lot of it has to do with fear of losing some type of perceived power. And maybe having a conversation about why this is so, offensive to them, for Black and brown people to, be recognized and to be heard. Have the conversation. Don't shy away from it. Parents can also get themselves informed. Try to understand, what is critical race theory, right? Really, what is critical race theory? Don't go just by your neighbor who's saying, they're teaching critical race theory, and you go, oh my gosh, what, really? Because it's a trigger word. Yeah, find out what that is. Find out what you can do. Have the conversation with members of your family teachers at your child's school, if there is anything, there that you can do. Number one, let's talk about, and I don't want to take this conversation on a whole different level, but what are they learning in school? Are all of the novels that they're reading, do they all have a white person or white male as the protagonist? Are all of the authors white males or even white females? What are they reading in schools, right? What are they learning in schools? Find out, get yourself informed. And once you are more informed, you can see, you can understand, and you can begin to have productive conversations with people about what really is and is not happening in schools. And let's tell the truth, it's about truth telling. This is what happened. This is not what happened. Tell the truth and support schools in their efforts to tell the truth to children. Right? We're going to be a generation and a society with a lot of work to do to undo some wrongs, right? That have really begun to be exponentially problematic, especially through this time in years to come, because we want to hide it from children. You can't hide it. You can't hide it. That's not the solution. Mm. So get informed. Don't be afraid to have the conversation. And sort of, ask some questions, try to understand why people believe what they believe. And once you're informed, then you can, help them really understand the truth.
Yeah, I'm reflecting a little bit on your earlier statement about maybe a regret of getting it out there earlier, really kicking and screaming about this. At an early stage in the game. And I'm thinking about the experience that I've had here in Bellevue, and Paul was there, he's been there for a while. Whereas we were seeking to institute a policy that really sort of highlighted our organization's need to transform our practices and how we serve children so that we can create a more equitable space for folks to feel welcome and affirmed and successful, based on whatever their definition is. And this was right around the time that this movement initiated, about 3.5 years ago or so, Paul, is that right? 3.5 years ago. And we had this discussion, Dr. Kane, in advance of doing a lot of this work with the superintendent at that time, who said, we really want to fly under the radar a little bit, so that the work doesn't get halted, so it doesn't get stopped, so that people don't jump in front of it and roadblock its potential progress. And so we tried our best for years in working with Pacific Educational Group and doing other bodies of work that really brought racial equity consciousness into our system. But man, when we pulled the trigger on rolling out a series of community cafes where we sought the interest of our community on the policy, or at least the proposed policy that we had drafted, it just went sideways, like so sideways, so super fast. Our community presently here on this side, on the east side, is a bit over 45% Asian, a bit over. And our white population here in this community is under 40 at this point, under 40%. And so we have a lot of folks in our community who have migrated and immigrated to this area and are migrating and immigrating here for the opportunities that they see to feel that they're going to get for their children that they may not get in other places. I'd imagine that Queen Anne's County may be fairly similar in that educational attainment level attracts a lot of folks, foreign and domestic. And so I agree with this, because what we did not do early on is bring the community along with us. And so when it landed on our community that we were doing this body of work, they shut us down for about 2 years in being progressive in that effort. And we finally, ultimately, were able to pass this policy, but it took a full 3 years in order for us to bring on board the voice of the stranger, that person who oftentimes is a naysayer or does not want to mobilize that community to at least join us in helping to craft what was to be disseminated across our region. But it was a hard struggle and a hard lesson to learn. And so I really appreciate that advisement. Do you have advisement for superintendents who are in this journey? Because what I don't want to continue to happen, because it happens all over the place, I think about these racial equity movements and how we got to have one. We got to have a racial equity director because we need to show our community that we're doing something. Even though we're not really doing something, we're going to hire that title. And then put people in these pitted positions to just be targets for those who are anti this movement. And so for those who are seeking to initiate efforts, those who are seeking to launch anything that is in the direction of what is the opposite of this cursory, intentional argument for critical race theory, for those who want to journey towards justice, what advisement do you have for them?
First and foremost, don't stop. Don't let those voices, the negative voices, deter you and your passion for what you're doing, because there's a reason. We got to check in with our why, right? Why we are doing this. And, to this day, I defy a person, Black, white, or any other ethnicity, to look at the face of a child who's in need and deny that child, or to look at a child who we know is underrepresented, who we know is not meeting with success, who we know has a great degree of barriers in front of them, and say, no, I'm not going to help you. Right. So I defy any person to do that. I mean, there's got to be some pure evil to say, no, this one, but not that one. So let's bring it back to what this really is about. And that is about children and doing what's right for children. So we got to be thinking about that, and don't stop doing the work. So just like you said, as you reflected on my comments about, I would have probably started to bring the community along earlier. Definitely tap into your allies, tap into your social, political, cultural capital. You got to bring people with you who can speak for you when you can't speak for yourself. The other thing that I would say to superintendents is produce the evidence. Produce the evidence that shows why you are engaging in this particular work, what difference you anticipate that this particular work is going to make, right? Put faces, if their parents are willing, put children in front of the community, not for target practice, not to be ostracized, but if it is your African-American student group, or if it is your students who receive special education services, put that data out there. Let people see the reason. What is the evidence that you have for why you are doing what you're doing? I think that people need to see that, and they need to be really, really clear about it. And the benefit of it, if it is for no more than the notion of building better relationships so that students have a sense of belonging in their school, which is number one, right? We have to reach our children. We have to let them know that the people in our schools care for them. I mean, truly care for them and their well-being. And when we do have employees in our buildings that care for children and their well-beings, they will too look at children and see, this is the evidence. This is why we have to change the way we are doing business for students. Because what we've been doing for the last however many years, 1960s, we started looking at civil rights and how we do things in schools to be inclusive, right, of students who are either receiving special education services or minority groups, and why we do those things. So if we can really hone in on why we're doing what we're doing, who it's supposed to help, what the benefits will be, then we're going to do better, because what we've been doing is not working. We, to this day, every academic indicator will show you that Black males are at the bottom of the list, whether it is for student performance or whether it is for suspension and expulsion. Black males are we have got to do something different, and different will likely mean that it is not under the frame of conforming to white culture, right? That's not working for Black boys. When we look at the teachers, the majority of teachers who are teaching children, white women, that's the majority. It's not everybody, but it definitely is the majority. We got to do some work there. And we got to help them to not be afraid of the outcome. Don't be afraid to do something different, right? Because we're doing this for children.
Thank you. I have a couple rapid fire questions for you, but Paul, I want to see if you have anything before I jump into that.
No, go ahead. The floor is yours, my friend.
Rapid fire. Here we go.
Rapid fire. Okay. So what is your why, Dr. Kane?
Children, doing the right thing for children. I do this for children, period.
Do you have a phrase that you find yourself repeating over and over to people in order to help them to grow or to, gain traction in what it is your belief, but something that you find yourself saying or repeating over and over again?
Well, I asked the question, why are you doing this? Why you got to be clear on why you are doing this. That's one of the first questions I asked my Tuesday night class. Why are you doing this? Why are you in this class? Why do you want to learn about this? Because that makes a difference. And that's going to either sustain you or be the reason why you leave.
When you're not doing this kind of work, what do you do to unwind or to just decompress from being as excellent as you are?
Oh, thank you. First of all, I'm a gardener and I grow tomatoes and peppers and all kinds of herbs, and I give them away. I'm drying peppers right now to crush and give as gifts, crushed red pepper flakes. I love gardening. That's what I do.
That's awesome, because it leads to a food question.
Yes.
When your two sons were growing up in your household, what would they collectively say is the best meal you made?
Well, first of all, for a period of time, my boys wouldn't eat anything other than chicken nuggets. Okay, let's be real about it. But I am a good cook, and they like my food. My family, my house is the holiday house. So it doesn't matter whether it's like a turkey dinner or just a regular meal. They're good with it. So I can't say that they have a favorite, but I'm the cooker and the baker.
That's awesome. We're coming over, by the way.
Okay, everybody's welcome.
Do you have a book recommendation, something that has inspired you or something that you would like others to be inspired by?
What I'm focusing right now is a lot of books about equity and equity practices in schools and how to consider that. So Street Data is a book that I am looking at, that we are reading right now. We're reading and discussing it in one of my classes, and it carries over to other classes. So Street Data right now, that's the one.
I just bought that book for my staff.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a book study that's happening in our district around that.
Great.
Okay, so the last one I have, and I'll ask Paul if he has any. Is there a particular quote or poem that inspires you? Something that I don't do this, but I know a lot of people who do, who have something on a mirror as they wake up in the day, or something that is written somewhere where they see it regularly or often. Is there something that inspires you in that regard?
So I don't have an affirmation that I repeat or that I read regularly. I just, wake up and have got to be my best me for that day. Sometimes it's a great day. Sometimes it's a good day. Sometimes not so good day. But, I am beyond having a bad day. I am something can happen and it's for the moment. And guess what we're going to do? We're going to move on from it because it's not going to ruin the rest of my day. I've lived that life for a long enough time to where I know that's not the way to approach things. So let the thing happen, live in the moment and move on. So I just try to have, be the best me that I can be on any given day.
I'm going to take that as your quote. I'm beyond having a bad day.
I really am.
That's so dope.
I'm over it.
That's so dope. I love it. I love that so much. Paul?
Well, before I ask my question, I just want to kind of remind you, Dr. Kane, I know you're very happy in your position, but the Bellevue School District will be hiring a superintendent.
Just saying. If you
just saying.
You don't know how many people have said things like that to me. You just don't know. But I am just grateful to be at Penn and impacting leaders of the future. So
I am not at all surprised. There's nothing more unsurprising to me. So I guess my question would be, what signs of hope do you see in the system?
In the education system?
Yeah.
You know what? That we have higher ed that is now addressing how pre-service teachers are being trained. And they are including issues of equity and social justice and racial justice so that they are prepared to deal with what is really happening in schools. So I am very hopeful about that. We can't downplay that. It's important. And we'll, I think, retain teachers a bit better once they are really prepared to be in the classroom. So I am really hopeful about that.
Dr. Kane, can I, as you do your work there at Penn, can I add to that list family engagement as someone who oversees that body of work in the Bellevue School District? I'm finding that there are a few who have had the training necessary to do it really well.
Yeah.
And a lot of apprehension, which does bleed into racial justice and injustice, bias and prejudice, right? And so the more we can funnel people into understanding better the community that they serve, as opposed to just the child that they serve, the better experience that child will have.
I so agree with you, because it really is about the family, right? It's not just about the child. A child comes from somewhere.
That's right.
I agree.
Absolutely. Any questions you have for us, Doc?
Wow. First of all, just thank you, because I'm completely impressed. I know the work that you're doing right now is so important, and it's going to be beneficial to so many people. The questions that you asked to bring to light the things that are happening right now, not only with me, but across the country, and just having the conversation and a forum where we can make people aware of what's happening. And that awareness will definitely breed action. So I am grateful for what you're doing. Not necessarily a question, but just please continue to do what you're doing.
Thank you. We appreciate you so much. Next time I'm in Pennsylvania, I certainly will swing by and say hello.
Must.
That would be a treat. I think Paul and I are, when Paul has alluded to taking a sabbatical at some point in time. So when he does, I think we're going to go on tour. And
come on over to Penn. We'll welcome you with open arms.
We're going to go by Penn. We're going to swing by New York and kick it for a little while. Hang out. And so thank you so much for your time. This has been remarkable that you've gifted us with so much of it. And I am truly impressed by your survivalism and how you're thriving beyond the experiences that were negatively bestowed upon you, and using that to positively influence the future of the leaders that we have today. So thanks for that work. That's really cool stuff.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I received that.
Yeah, you're an absolute treasure, Dr. Kane. Really appreciate you visiting with us today. And it was just so inspiring to hear you talk. So thank you.
I'm grateful.
I've got notes upon notes, buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we do. This is actually for our benefit, right? Like it's, the podcast is just
perfect. So we know the work happens. So that's what it's all about. So thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you, ma'am. Thank you. And we're going to conclude our podcast at this time. We hope to have further conversation with you for certain.
Yeah. Thank you.